Dear colleagues, unfortunately this presentation is not going to be as exciting as the previous one. I'm going to be talking about a subject which most of us as scientists don't really want to talk about, which is money. We like to have it, but we normally like to use it as we want to. But unfortunately, as most cases, there are people that control the purse strings, and they would like to know how they can utilize this funding to benefit South Africa in general. One of the main things for government is to look and see how can they create jobs and how can they alleviate poverty in South Africa. And unfortunately, that means that you have to look at ways and means of maximizing the benefit of the funding that is available. Unfortunately, we're not an economy that has maybe $1 trillion available for research. We have a much smaller amount, but we have to see how far we can take that money that we have. Now, to utilize that funding, what DST did is they basically looked at the creation of a number of roadmaps. And this presentation will go about that process and the results that we've got so far looking at the photonics roadmap. So, as I said, the contents, we're going to look and say, what is the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Roadmap project about? Why was photonics chosen? I think Professor Marza gave a very good reason why photonics was one of the subjects that was chosen. So I think I can maybe almost skip that slide. We're looking at the road mapping process. What is it all about? The timeline of this roadmap that we are going through. And then looking at the various elements that make up the roadmap and preliminary conclusions that we've reached so far. And finally, acknowledgements of those people that have participated and given information that informs this roadmap. So firstly, as you can see, this is not a CSIR presentation, this is actually a DST presentation. The reason for that is that DST actually commissioned this project. And the objectives of this was mainly two things. Firstly, they want to guide DST's R&D program, and they want to seek alignment with industry priorities. Now, if you've been to any conferences that's looked at industry, one of the main things most of the people always talk about is the valley of death. Now, the valley of death is basically that gap between research and industry. And quite often it is very difficult to bridge that gap. You have to look very carefully at how you can take research from the basic side all the way through to applied research, develop a product, and eventually roll out that product. So what DST wants to do through this roadmap process is to look at areas where there's industry involvement in photonics, where there's basic research in photonics, and try and bring those two groups together. So what they did over the last 2 years, firstly, they did an additive manufacturing roadmap that Ndemiso mentioned as well, where they looked at the benefits of additive manufacturing for South African industry. Now, following the success of that process, they said, but okay, let's try and look at additional areas of advanced manufacturing technology, which we also have to focus on and try and beneficiate those areas as well. Now, the 4 areas that they came up with was advanced electronics, advanced photonics, aerostructures, and affordable and smart automation. Following the identification of those 4 areas by DST, they basically initiated the development of these individual technology roadmaps, and they identified various task teams. Now, on the photonics side, the task team that was made responsible was myself, Harder Schreling from the CSIR National Laser Center, Philip Minnar from Denel Dynamics, and Heidi Abramser from the University of Johannesburg. So the 4 of us were tasked basically to lead this process that I'm going to describe now and try and develop a roadmap that will beneficiate the photonics industry in South Africa. So this little slide that you have here, I'm glad to see a lot of these figures that I have here correspond pretty well with the figures that Professor Marza put up. Now, I think the most important thing is to say, why photonics? Now, photonics are basically divided into 3 areas. We have the core photonics components and materials that Professor Marza also put up a slide about. We have the photonics products, and then we have the photonics enabled products. So that you can see photonics really crosses a wide area of industry. It's not only the core components, the lasers, the LEDs and that, it's the things where these photonics actually enable some other process. Gene sequencing, that was mentioned as well. Without photonics, you can't do that. If you then look at photonics enabled products, the lights in your car, the little diode that's in your CD player, all of these things are very important. And if you add all these things up together, you find that in 2014, the photonics market was around about $500 billion and expected to expand to around about more than $600 billion by the year 2020. Now, that top figure that you see there comes from a US publication. The bottom figure comes out of one of the latest Horizon 2020 publications. It's a roadmap that the EU did looking at photonics. Because the EU's gone and defined 6 key enabling technologies. Now, one of those enabling technologies, they've said that they have a leading role in, and that came out of the figure that Professor Maza also had. We can actually see what the concentration of photonics in Europe is they've said to maintain that lead that they have to invest further in photonics. Then they have to grow photonics. Now, what they've said is that in 2011, it was about 350 billion euros, the size of the photonics market, and that's expected to grow to 615 billion euros by 2020. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm sure all of you are going to get these presentations. And it's interesting to look at the European figures to see where the growth areas are. Which are the largest sectors? Which are the sectors that they are focusing? Where do they think the most growth is going to take place?